Maggie was crying while she was walking down the street. After years of trying unsuccessful fertility treatments, she just gave up on the kids by herself. She looked into adoption and finally found a good match, 3-year-old triplets. She signed the contract, but when she did a background check, she got the shock of her life. She had no other option than to cancel the adoption. The worst part was that the triplets had already been in the care of Maggie and Tom for a bit of time now. They really felt like they had gotten a bond with the children, but now that Maggie had been confronted with the bombshell about them, she knew that she could not keep them. These boys had a lot more history than the adoption agency had disclosed to them, and the details of this dark history gave Maggie a feeling that she had never felt before. But what had happened in the triplets' past? What was so shocking about it? And will Maggie and Tom cancel the adoption over it? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. It was a difficult time for Maggie and her husband Tom. They were finally ready to start a family and had been trying to get pregnant for almost 5 years. First naturally, but when that didn't work, they looked into IVF. But after multiple treatments and going through almost all their savings, they still had no baby. They eventually realized that adoption was most likely their only option, even though Maggie was not the biggest fan of it at first. In her mind, the children would not be truly hers. A very tiny concern in hindsight, as when the couple decided to go through with the adoption, it would bring a lot more consequences with it. One day, they got a call about 3 little boys. They were triplets and desperately needed a home. Maggie and Tom initially wanted only one child, but they couldn't say no after seeing a picture of them. So they agreed to come by the office and pick them up in a few hours. Suddenly, everything was happening so soon. They quickly tidied up the house, bought everything they needed, and got their room ready. When it was finally time to drive to the office, Maggie and Tom felt nervous. Their lives were about to change in a matter of minutes, and they really hoped it would be for the better. The first week was tough. The boys had to adjust to their new lives, and so did Maggie and Tom. They had no experience raising triplets, which brought the expected struggles, but after the first month or so, things finally started to settle, and Maggie began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But that didn't last long because one of the boys, Mika, started to behave differently. He began hitting his brothers, Cody and Alex, and acted out constantly. It became so difficult that Tom had to separate Mika from the others. Maggie and Tom tried everything, gentle parenting, redirection, even therapy, but nothing worked. Soon items went missing from the house, and Cody and Alex began showing strange bruises. Concerned, Maggie contacted the adoption agency, but they offered no information. Maggie was left wondering why they were so secretive. She shared her concerns with Tom, and together they agreed something had to change. They ordered 3 DNA test kits, hoping to learn more about the boys' background. When the kits arrived, they quickly collected samples and sent them off. Days later, the results arrived, and what they revealed shocked them. One match was found, a close relative, their father. Sadly, he was deceased, but they had a name. His name was listed only as L. Raskovsky. It wasn't a lot to go on, but it was something. Maggie clung to the hope that it might lead to other family members. Tom was more skeptical. Determined to learn more, they searched the name online. But what they discovered would shift everything in their lives. An old article appeared in the search results. It described a fire that had destroyed a family home, the same home the triplets had once lived in. A family photo accompanied the piece: the mother, the triplets' babies, and their father. The article stated everyone survived the fire, though the cause was never determined. Oddly, it only referred to the parents as Mr. and Mrs. Raskovsky, without providing full names. Maggie proposed reverse searching the photo. To their surprise, it worked. They found the same image linked elsewhere, but this time, the father was identified with a different name: Arthur Sanderson. Searching Arthur Sanderson brought up several results, but one article in particular stood out. It described a missing child from years ago and included an address. Maggie and Tom agreed to investigate. They didn't feel comfortable leaving the boys with a sitter, especially now. So Maggie went alone, leaving Tom with the children and promising to call if needed. After a 2-hour drive, Maggie arrived at the address. The house appeared abandoned and dilapidated, untouched for decades. Still determined, she approached the neighbor's house and rang the bell. An elderly woman answered and invited Maggie inside. Over tea, she listened to Maggie's questions. "I've been expecting someone," the woman said, surprising Maggie. She explained that the family who had lived next door, a mother, father, and son, had always seemed odd. They kept to themselves, the boy didn't attend school, and strange noises came from the house at night. Then one day the house was raided by a SWAT team. The boy was taken away and the family vanished. No one ever returned for their belongings, and the house had remained untouched for over 40 years. Maggie struggled to process what she'd heard. Why would a family disappear and leave everything behind? And what did it mean for the triplets? Could their father have been involved in something dark? Was his identity even real? Her mind filled with questions. How old was the boy when the house was swatted? The old woman shrugged. "I'm not sure, 17, maybe 18. That was vague, but enough for Maggie to move on. She thanked the woman and left. Instead of returning home, Maggie headed straight to the abandoned house. Something told her it held answers. She broke in, despite knowing it was illegal. She needed to know the truth about the boy's past. The interior was frozen in time. Dust blanketed every surface, and piles of unopened mail sat by the door. Her heart pounded as she followed the tracks upstairs. They led to a closed door. She pressed her ear to it and heard snoring. Maggie slowly opened the creaking door. The noise stirred the man inside. He sat up, confused, asking who she was. He didn't seem angry, just tired and sad. "I'm Maggie," she said carefully. "Are you Arthur Sanderson?" He hesitated but didn't answer. Still, she felt sure it was him. He looked so much like the boy from the old photo. So she told him the truth, that she had adopted 3 boys, triplets with dark brown hair. At that, his expression changed completely. "You have my boys?" It was him. Maggie asked what had happened to him and his family. Arthur looked away, reluctant. He feared revealing too much would cost his sons their future. "I'll tell you, but only if you promise to go through with the adoption," he said. Maggie couldn't commit to that, not honestly. "I'll tell you everything, but only on one condition," the man said. "You have to promise to go through with the adoption no matter what I tell you." Maggie knew she couldn't accept that condition blindly, but she couldn't say no to him. She had to find out the truth. So, she lied. "Yes, I promise," Maggie lyingly said to the man. The man sighed again. "It is a very long story, but it all began when I was arrested for a robbery. I was very young, but I had proposed to the boy's mother and needed cash for the wedding. They sent me to jail, but their mother stuck by me. A few years after I was released from jail, Becca, the triplets' mother, became pregnant. But our living situation wasn't ideal, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, but Becca was an addict. To save my family's future and to secure Becca some money, I faked my own death. That way, Becca got some insurance money, and she could build a life for the 4 of them. But sadly, her addiction got the best of her, and she died when the boys were only 3 years old." Maggie gasped. She had never expected the boy's past to be this sad. "I'm so sorry," she said to Arthur. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I wanted to be there for them after their mother passed away, but according to my papers, I was dead as well. So I couldn't do anything, and it broke my heart. Maggie had heard enough." This was way worse than she had expected. She knew she promised Arthur to adopt the boys either way, but she just couldn't, not after hearing his story. Once home, she explained everything to her husband, and he agreed with her. They had to cancel the adoption. It was a very difficult decision, but Maggie knew it was the right one. Tom and Maggie felt they had to tell Arthur the news in person, so they drove to him together with the triples. Arthur was very surprised to see them when they arrived at the house. He cried happy tears seeing his boys again. But then Maggie and Tom told him the news. But it wasn't the news you'd expect, because they had set up the surprise of their lives, and it involved Arthur. They had registered Arthur as an adoptive parent, but not under his real name. No, under the name he had created for himself. They had explained everything to a social worker, and after bribing her with some money, she ruled Arthur a fit father for his boys. Maggie and Tom knew they couldn't live in that old house, so they offered to let Arthur and the boys stay in their guest house until he found a forever home. That way, the boys could still see Maggie and Tom, and Arthur could slowly adjust to being a father. And in the end, everything worked out for the best. The end.